Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast.
Hello, everybody. We are back again. It's been a while. It's been since the games, actually. It's been quite a while. Main reason, we're all busy and trying real hard to help as many people as we can doing the things we do. And that puts us all over the world in different places at any given time. So we got the team back together. And today we're going to dig into Olympic weightlifting and how we utilize a conjugate system to further athletes' results in snatch and clean and jerk.
Yeah, excited for this content. Obviously, might be a little overdue. Nonetheless, we're getting to it right now. And before we start kind of digging into the content behind it, let's just get a little background in how we use or what sort of athletes we're training the Olympic lifts with. Shane, why don't you go ahead and kick off?
Well, first, I'd like to talk about what athletes we don't train, do Olympic lifts with. And, traditionally, like in the United States, what we have is we have a lot of, we do Olympic lifting in every sport, traditionally, like when you're looking at strength coaches. And, not every school and places don't have strength coaches, like Jesse and Chris. And it's not knocking strength coaches, but we all go through different levels. The first year I was a strength coach, I was not the level that I am now, right? And so as we grow, we have more things available to us. We have more knowledge, and we can apply our craft in a much better fashion. But what I see in high schools is we have a lot of what I'll call low-level athletes. And I don't mean anything negative about that, but if I just make it simple and I take a look at a high school team, like a high school football team, and I look at that, and how many kids have an opportunity to go to Division I college? There's your high-level athletes right there, okay? And then every level below that just drops down a little bit. And so what I don't want to do is take people who don't have a good background, they don't have a good foundation, they don't have good GPP, and throw them into a high skill set movement with a low skill set coach. And what I mean by low skill set coach, I'm not knocking anybody, but a lot of schools have volunteers. They have people that are maybe newer to lifting or newer to coaching. They're not necessarily having a coach that could take someone to the Olympics, and Olympic lifting is what I'm saying. So what I do believe in first is obviously giving a foundation, getting GPP, getting good conditioning so they don't fatigue, so they don't start to break position down from being fatigued. And I want a good balanced individual, okay? So then after that, what I look at is what sport, what do they need in their sport, right? So if I'm looking at throwers, for throwers for sure, like shot putters, things like that, discus throwers, Olympic lifting is phenomenal. Basically, a lot of different types of clean variations or clean and jerk variations are great for them. Obviously CrossFit athletes, you have to work on Olympic lifting in itself independently, not just in a WOD, because that's where you're going to clean up technique, perfect technique. And obviously when you're getting to the games and stuff like that, they do have 1 rep maxes for snatch variations or clean and jerk, split snatches, different things like that. So, CrossFit athlete has to work on Olympic lifting solely on its own as well. And, later on, as we're talking, we'll talk about how we'll go through that and how we can optimize someone for that. But basically, I look at what types of speeds the sport needs, and I look at the level of the athlete. Do they move well? Are they well balanced? Are they well conditioned? And then, we go on from that. So, we're looking at like some track athletes. A lot of times will be something that I would use Olympic lifting for. There's positions in football that we'll use. I'm not doing snatches with football players, but I'll do clean and jerk variations for them. But, for me, I'm probably going to be a little bit different than Jesse or Chris in the sense that I'll probably do a little bit less with my athletes in Olympic lifting than most, just because I've yet to find an athlete that their sport would be a good match for Olympic lifting that I don't have room for improvement through normal stuff that I normally do. Like when we're talking about speed squats, speed deadlifts, things like that, I usually find that there's still room for improvement in those areas. And until I get to someone to a certain level, I don't bring in Olympic lifting to kind of more near the end. But we all do it at different levels, as far as how often we bring it in or not. But it just basically depends on, like I said, depends on the sport, depends on the speed. I'm not bringing it in for endurance athletes. I'm bringing in for an athlete that needs to be explosive. And then we have good transfer for football, we have good transfer for track and field. Usually, we could do it for soccer. I'm not doing that a whole lot. I usually already notice that even though there's a lot of movement for soccer players, they usually don't have enough strength in their hips. So they usually overload their hips too much and create some mobility issues. So we're usually working on some other things for them as well. But so yeah, basically football for me, track and field for me is like the highest levels of places that I would do that typically.
For us, actually, it's just CrossFitters.
Mm-hmm.
For all our sport athletes, we
Oh.
just are using Conjugate system. So we've just been more effective with the principles and basics of Conjugate for all of our sport athletes. But for CrossFitters, obviously having clean and jerk and snatch be part of their workouts, things that, I mean, how often do you see max clean and jerk or a max snatch come up at competition, stuff like that? Like there is very common movement patterns. So we focus our Olympic weightlifting predominantly on CrossFitters. I mean, in the past, we have had a weightlifting team out of the gym who would just be weightlifting and competing in the sport of weightlifting. But I think it's been a bunch of years now since we've had that. I mean, all of them just ended up transitioning into powerlifting, who were competing for weightlifting.
Yeah.
So yeah, for us, just CrossFitters.
See, that's the thing too. Really, what I'd say, discus throwers and throwers are the main thing for track. But like Jesse said, it's just one of those things that it's not really huge for us in sport, and really a lot of times the only reason we really do it for people is because they need it for college, or college wants to know how much they do.
Yeah, totally.
And I don't want someone going there and not having built good for it if that's what their strength coaches are going to make them do. I don't want them getting hurt.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. We actually have had that come up a couple times with some of our youth lifters or youth athletes where they're expected to hit certain numbers on like power clean. And that's mostly power clean, actually. Yeah, and that's a good point, actually. We have used it then to just build the foundation of the skill set of the movement. So we're setting them off like capable and healthy to be able to go execute on that.
Yeah, we use the same thing. I'll use them for our CrossFit athletes, but I have been using them with our football players here with high school, especially this season. It was kind of nice, they're in the middle of the season, so you got to be kind of careful, see where everybody's at injury wise, like if the body's getting beat up. So we did a lot of technique work on days where it's like at the end of the week, or if they had a game coming up, we wouldn't get into heavy lifts, but we do a lot of just technique because those kids are going to be asked to, show what their power cleans are. And obviously some transference. We'll dig into the science here as we get through and why you two choose speed squats, because that's definitely traditionally with the traditional strength and conditioning coach, you see those Olympic lifts used for sport athletes. But I think, what we've seen with the conjugate system is we can find some other ways. And I think that's a good kind of a segue into, Shane, this is probably a good question for you. When we think about the differences of Olympic weightlifting versus like traditional powerlifting, so your squat, bench, deadlift versus Olympics, the snatch and the clean and jerk, obviously movement pattern stuff, but dig in a little bit like speed. Like what are we thinking about when we look at these movements?
So, as far as like how I choose between using like a powerlifting movement versus Olympic lifting, is that what you're talking about, or no?
We're doing just like some speed strength. So like what change? Obviously the speed is a big one. Like if you think about somebody squatting, how long it takes them to complete a squat or a deadlift versus, it's not going to be that slow in a snatch and clean and jerk for a reason.
So this is basically, where I'm coming from, and I'm sure this is the same kind of thing that Jesse's thinking. And as far as when we're working with athletes, the problem is this: Olympic lifting is a high skill set movement, okay? And when you're talking about someone playing football or soccer or any other sport, that is the sport that should be where they're the highest level of technique, right? So Olympic lifting would be secondary to them. It's not their main sport. It is something they use to do their sport if that's what their coaches are doing with them. So if we don't have a high level mover with high skill set and high level coach, that's a problem, right? But the problem is if you look at the areas of speeds when you're doing like a clean and jerk or snatch, and a lot of areas can be anywhere like between like 1.2 to 1.4 meters per second. There's some variations in there depending on what area the pull they're in, and obviously the first pull is not going to be fastest once the second pull happens, where your speed comes up. So the problem that we have, and one of the many reasons why we don't use this for athletes that often, is because when we do a squat variation or a deadlift variation, it's an easier movement to coach and teach. It's easy for us to regulate the exact speed we're using throughout. So we'll take something like football, where it's a speed strength sport at roughly 0.8 meters, 1 meter per second. And then we can actually work to get someone better at that speed of their sport, right? So Olympic lifting will be a little harder technique wise. And when you're looking at it, you look at a lot of Olympic lifters are very quad dominant. We're looking at a sport of football. We really want hips and hamstrings. They're huge, for a sport of football. So if you get into like a box squat, you use more hamstring to come off the box. It's static overcome by dynamic. So when you come down onto the box, you will have a pause. With that pause, you have a small deload of stored kinetic energy. And then what you end up doing is contracting your muscle tissue to accelerate off the box. So that's the static overcome by dynamic. When you're Olympic lifting, if you do a clean on the way down, you're storing kinetic energy, and then you have a stretch reflex to help you get going. But when you're on a football team and you're on the line, when you're on the line and the play starts, you go static overcome by dynamic. That stretch reflex isn't there for for that first step and launching off that line. So it doesn't transfer over as well, doing the Olympic lifting versus, say, a deadlift or a squat. It's very easy for us to get an athlete into those speeds. When we're looking at Westside Barbell and the numbers and the percentages that we've developed and utilized over the years, that is to get us to move at 0.8 meters, 1 meter per second. So let's say you're a little bit, you have an athlete that's a little on the slow side. You might need to drop those percentages by, say, 5%, but you're going to be very close just with those percentages that are, kind of prescribed traditionally through the system. So you just need to make slight adjustments. There's not really enough time under tension in Olympic lifting to carry over through football, wrestling, things like that. Once you come off the line and you create contact, you have to still be able to drive and push. So, when you look at, time someone doing a clean, right? And then look at, when you time it, the tricky part would be, ideally would have a scenario of a way to time it to where when the bar becomes weightless, that time doesn't count. Okay. Because when you pull on the bar, there's a point where the bar becomes weightless and you pull yourself underneath the bar, but you cannot produce force when there's no weight there, right? So you can't produce maximal force against minimal weight. Once the bar starts floating up, you don't have anything to pull against or to push against, right? So therefore, you're not producing force at a high enough level through that time for it to transfer over. But if I want to do triples, it's in a speed squat. For the average person, that's 1 second down, 1 second up. 3 reps is 6 seconds. What's the average length of a play in football? 5 to 6 seconds.
Yep.
What do you say?
Yeah.
So we get the length of a play done. So we're going to produce force long enough. We are working on the 0.8 meters, 1 meter per second, which is the speed of the actual sport. We always have that saying, if you don't know the speed of your sport or the speed of which you're moving a barbell at, how do you know what sport you're training for? So we can transfer it into a speed that actually works, right? We have a long enough force rate production to transfer to sport. We have static overcome by dynamic, which is exactly how the sport starts every single play. And again, it's an easy movement to be able to judge and work on. Hard enough to get someone who has only been exposed to Olympic lifting for a year or so to do a perfect, to do a really good clean or clean and jerk. Really hard to do triples on that, and have that look perfect, right? So this is much easier for coaches to look at, much easier for the athletes to understand, substantially easier for us to make sure that we're in the speeds that we need it to be in. If we needed someone to be a little faster off the line, we can always drop their percentage of weight and we can actually get out of speed strength and go towards more pure speed if that's something that's needed. We can use our plyometrics if that's the case. So we're basically choosing these variants because they're easier for athletes to learn, easier for coaches to teach. They transfer better to sport, and it's easier for us to control the speeds throughout the range of motion in the lifts to directly transfer into sport what we're doing.
Yeah, totally. Jesse, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, we're in the same boat.
Same
That's
idea,
kind of what
yeah.
we're going to get up to. Yeah. Then it's just a matter of then the question becomes, when the movements become a requirement of the sport,
Right, exactly.
like CrossFit, then how the frick do we do it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a great, so how do you use the Olympic lifts with, obviously you work with, fittest humans on earth. How do you use the Oli lifts?
Yeah. So for our gym, for our programming, we sort of split the lifts up. So we've been like, because we've been using the conjugate system in our regular CrossFit programming for more than a decade. There's pieces we found to be effective, and a lot of stuff we've learned along the way, and lots of mistakes made that we've kind of course corrected. So these days, we take snatch and drop it in as like an upper piece. So for all intents and purposes, when we're programming or when I'm programming, I consider snatch a upper body piece, just because it's just not the same tax on the low body and legs that sort of a clean is, or any sort of variation of squat or deadlift. So snatch is an upper, and then clean is a lower. Clean and jerk is sort of like one of those pieces where we have a tendency to sort of like, I mean, it depends how we want to work it, but most of the time we'll put it in as a lower as well, just because that clean is still present in there. And so those sort of pieces are just, that's how we split them. And then we do wave cycles with them. So the predominantly our Olympic work at the gym level is focused on skill set. There's just developing and building those skill sets in the movement pattern. And it's not necessarily the reps or volume that we're looking to build the strength for the patterns. We're just trying to dial them in. So we have a pretty solid, our lead in to starting if we're going to snatch. So if we're going to snatch and we're going to work sort of what we'd say would be like a dynamic effort piece. So snatch would definitely be considered that for us. We'll have a long lead in of prepping mobility and range of motion, making sure athletes are like in their best position they're going to be able to achieve. So one of the pieces is strength for sure. But often, I mean, especially with like Gen Pop, like you're dealing with like a lot of people are just going to struggle with that last couple percentage or last couple degrees of range of motion. And that's going to have a big effect. So we kind of try to put like a lot of emphasis on like preparation and mobility leading into it. And then a real easy 3-week wave cycle. If we're going to work, actually, I mean, the easiest would be 9 weeks and starting with like hang snatch. So keeping it really simple, focusing on that like extension and pull under piece and not having to stress about the floor. So we do a 3-week wave of hang snatch. Then we might do a 3-week wave of snatch. And then we might do a 3-week wave of squat snatch. And inside of those waves for snatching, we'll do like 9 sets of 3 on the 75 seconds for week 1 and week 2, increasing weight between those. And then on week 3, we'll drop to 9 sets of 2 on the 75 seconds. Or you could stay at 9 sets of 3 and extend that time from 75 to 90 seconds. And again, the idea just becomes focusing on like volume of repetition, skill set and quality of movement, and how good is range of motion. So the language around those sessions would be a lot of trying to tag people who predominantly their issue is mobility driven and getting them sort of starting to apply extra work. I mean, we use Supple Leopard and have copies of it like all over the gym. Try to teach people like how to use it for themselves, coming in on like those, coming in later in the day for mobility work or preparation, coming in on like Thursdays or Sundays, which traditionally for our CrossFitters are rest days, and putting in a little bit extra time. So if their work is being done on improving their mobility, then as a coach, and it just comes down to our work to coaching the mechanics of the lift itself. For us, we predominantly use the Chinese weightlifting now. So Ma Strength and that Chinese system feels like it just resonated so much more for the conjugate system than like the American system for us. So we don't talk a lot about like triple extension and the 3 pulls. We talk about like the principles that the Chinese use for their patterns. And that's also helped a lot, is just following in line with more of like not building it up. I sometimes feel like a lot of time can be spent hyping up how hard these lifts are and how challenging it is, and expect them to be very frustrating and difficult. And instead we just try to focus on like keeping the language simple around them, and just those principles of be fast, keep that bar close, get low. Those sort of things are the things that are have sort of made the most improvement for us. And the other side too is also managing a program that keeps athletes healthy, so that inside of there, like how are people holding up to the volume and the reps? Like, are we seeing problems with that? And this system for us has been really effective. So snatch would come up like that, and clean and jerk or clean would come up in the same way. So instead of the dynamic effort piece for CrossFitters being speed squats or speed bench, we would get into Olympic lift as our primary piece. And then after that, pursue what was appropriate for the accessory pieces for what we're seeing with the group. And I mean, I guess that sounds kind of vague, but honestly, like that job is like watching your athletes you're working with and seeing those broad general weaknesses in a class where like, what would help everyone? And then if there's individuals who need something a little different, being able to be like, hey, everyone else is going to go do, croc rows next. Let's actually get you on the, seated row. Let's do that set, or we're going to do decline single arm DB rows and then GHD. Like that's going to be a little better for this person because of X. But in general, just looking for those broad pieces that are going to have the most effect on the sort of like the herd,
Yeah, the dynamic days the same way. That's how I use it. The triples, doubles, in that 1 to 90 second. And then, big, going around talking about language there is, there's a tendency, I think, with just CrossFitters in general of wanting to continue to overreach. And I mean, you really shouldn't do that with any lift, but especially the Oli lifts, because, they should be fast, they should be snappy, they should be clean. Those ones, there's, the neurological demand's a lot higher in those just because you've got these long sequences, you've got, deep ranges of motion if you're using the full snatch, especially. So keeping those movements clean, so we're not beating the joints up, the shoulders, the back, the knees, the hips, and then just allowing the other strength work to keep building up. You keep building up the deadlift, you keep building up the overhead squat. If you're keeping your lifts fast, you're keeping them clean, and you're not missing lifts, like as those other numbers go up, so will the snatch and the clean and jerk.
One thing, I think people listen to this. I don't want you to think that, we are bashing Olympic lifting. I think actually everybody on this podcast really has a great appreciation for Olympic lifting. So, it just, it's the way we look at things, like when we're looking at someone coming off of a line, their hips aren't as low as they would be in a snatch or clean and jerk when they set up, right? Their hips would be in a more position like you would see in a sumo, deadlift or a conventional deadlift. Their hips are higher. That's, more of an athletic stance, right? So we're looking at where's that pull start from. Jesse broke it down really well that we look at speeds. Where's their loss in speed? When I talk about a high skill set movement in Olympic lifting, I'm also talking about the way most people teach Olympic lifting, which, I wouldn't agree with. So the problem is what they're looking at is different than what we're looking at. We might look at what's your body position. Are you maintaining body position? Are you able to maintain body position? Or where are you losing speed at? Where are you gaining speed? For me, if you clean a weight and you can't stand up with it, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty simple. You need to have a heavier front squat. Some people will, throw all these a million things at it and say it's all so complicated. It's like, no, you need to be able to stand up with it. Okay. Once you can stand up with it, then we'll worry about getting overhead, right? But if you can clean it, we need to now worry about standing up with it, So, we actually love Olympic lifting because if it wasn't for Olympic lifting, we would not be here talking about what we're talking about today. Because obviously the Russians invented the conjugate sequence system, and the Chinese didn't produce an Olympic medal until they sent their two top lifters over to Russia for, I think it was 6 to 9 months. They produced their first gold medals, and then they became Olympic lifting coaches. Jesse found what the Chinese are doing. Really right now, I feel like the Chinese are the ones who are evolving it the fastest. And, Mass Strength's doing a great job with that. We see a lot of variations in accessory movements and stuff that they're utilizing. And they are utilizing sports specific accessories, like how does this accessory directly transfer into a clean or clean and jerk or a snatch, right? So they're doing some great things, but it all comes down to some very simple things, are we getting the speed that we need to get? Where are we missing a weight at? Why did you miss the weight? Well, like I said, if you clean it and you can't stand up with it, well, you need a higher front squat. And someone goes, well, but what if it was their back you couldn't maintain, or what was leg drive? It's like, well, whatever caused their front squat to go up is going to fix that. If you have weak spinal erectors or weak midline, well, you're going to have to fix that to have your front squat go up. If your quads need to get stronger, hamstrings, whatever it is, When we look at where we lose speed, I always look at a loss of speed and I think, okay, is there a mobility issue there, or is it a strength issue, or is it a combination of both? And that's how we, directly attack it. But like Jesse said, you look at a whole class and the majority will probably need similar things. You'll have some outliers here and there. Maybe their leverages are different, or they have had some mobility issues due to other sports, or maybe they've played other sports so long that they're not quite as balanced, or their strengths and weaknesses are different than everybody else, right? So then we can adjust our accessories for, from there, as far as that goes. But I just want, people to know, like, we don't dislike Olympic lifting. Actually, I think it's amazing. But if you study Olympic lifting, because what I've run into a lot of times, people who are into Olympic lifting in the U.S. tend to only follow what the coaches in the U.S. are doing. If you were to actually look outside and see what the Russians are doing, see what the Chinese are doing and what they've done throughout years, it's quite a bit different. You might look at things a little bit differently. When you look at someone like Klokov, who says, I stopped working on technique at 13 years old because by then he got technique as perfect as he was going to. He's like, once he hit 13, what he's going to work on is producing more force or force at a faster rate of speed. A lot of times coaches in the US will manipulate technique to get an extra kilo out of a lift, but really they're putting people in improper positions. Yeah, sure, that person got an extra kilo, 2 or 3 kilos on a bar more, but really what we're doing is working around a deficiency that they have. And what we need to do is build an athlete perfect for the sport, perfect for clean and jerks, perfect for snatches. We don't want to adjust technique wrapped around someone who's not built for their sport yet. What we want to do is take our maxes, take our technique work, take our speed days, take our accessories, and build the athlete perfect with what we're asking from them, okay? So the Russians and Chinese will do that. They first build an athlete to be perfect for their sport. They work on technique. Once technique is set in place at a young age, and they've built a foundation for these athletes, now the only thing they can do is produce more force and force at a faster rate of speed. That is our max day. That is our dynamic day. And then they have to balance out and optimize the leverages per weight class that the individual is in. That's where your accessories come in. Your accessories will give you the muscle mass and size that you need for your weight class. They optimize our leverages for our each individual build, and so that we can move perfectly and maintain perfect positions. So if it wasn't for Olympic lifting, we wouldn't be aware of all these different things, speed work, dynamic effort wouldn't, maybe it would be starting to come around now, but, think about this. It's been out for, since the 70s easily, actually probably a little even before then, but, they were experimenting before then, but early 70s is when it, like 72, I think it was, when it finally got, was named as a system. But, they were already working on stuff before then, right? If we just came out within the last couple of years, you guys wouldn't be hearing about this right now. It's just getting out to kind of the masses as of lately, really. And, but this stuff wouldn't be around if it wasn't for Olympic lifting. We actually just modified what Olympic lifters were doing in Russia and China for powerlifting. Okay. And if you look at the best countries in the world in powerlifting, it's the US, Russia and China are the top three. If you look at Olympic lifting, it's Russia and China are some of the top countries, and there's other countries in there, but yeah, the U.S. is really kind of nowhere to be seen on the world level, as far as a team goes. So it's just the principles that that we utilize are the same. And then like Jesse obviously said, over the last 10 years, so he's constantly modifying it, right? And the coach is going to modify it based on his population that he has in front of them, and he's going to modify it based on his knowledge as he goes. And since no one's ever, really, utilize this before, CrossFit's a new sport, right? So to transfer it into CrossFit, of course, there's going to be some learning curve. I think Jesse and Chris would probably agree with me on this. The nice thing is people always get worried, like, oh, you're experimenting on me. I've had athletes say it to me, like, yeah, you've broke quite a few world records while we're experimenting. How'd it work out for you? That it's like we experiment, but we also know what we're doing and we know the reaction of everything that we're doing. So we're not going to get hurt. We're going to evolve. We might just not evolve as fast as we want. And that's where our change comes in. Or maybe we found an easier way to teach someone, or we finally like, okay, cool. We need to get an athlete up to X level. Once we've done that, all right, could we have done that in a way that was easier on the body and less wear and tear? And then our mind starts working that way. Our principles always work. That's why there are principles, right? We just have to figure out how to apply them by percentages and what that looks like. And that's kind of the beauty of the conjugate system. It can be done quite a few different ways. So the way Jesse explained it is similar to the way I do it, but it's different. I do like what he's talking about with snatch for upper body. I do not do that, but it's one of those things that, maybe I'll try that with some athletes and see what the difference is. But it depends on quite a few things. So he might run his accessories on those days different than I do, and that might offset, the way I do it from the way he does sets it up. But it's very similar. We need your pulls heavy, we need your squats heavy, we need your acceleration there. So it depends on what you're strong and what you're weak at. Like I said, if you have phenomenal technique and clean the bar and phenomenal technique and you have great speed, but you can't stand up with it, I'm going to work on your front squat. If it's the opposite and you have a hard time getting underneath the bar with a clean, well, then, what we do is going to be a little bit different. Maybe our max movements are different for a while. Maybe our accessories are different for a while. It just depends on where you're strong and where you're weak at. The great thing is once you know the system, there's an answer for everything. It's not guesswork. It's look at the person in front of you, look at the population. Where do they gain speed? Where do they lose speed? Where do they fail at? And does their body maintain the position you want the whole time, or doesn't it? It doesn't have to be this thing like where we try to make like an art form where it's like, okay, the perfect snatch will never happen throughout the history of human. The perfect clean and jerk will never happen throughout the history of, the human race. It's like, then why are you looking for it? What I'm saying by that is, are you accelerating as fast as you can possibly accelerate? Are you strong? Do you maintain positions? Does the bar stay close to you? Do the principles of weightlifting apply to you? Are you failing in any of these points? And if you are, then knock those off the list first.
I think the movements can get so finite and specific with coaching so early, with like looking at all these little details, being super fussy about these little details pieces, when you're like, look, if they're strong and they have the mobility, then they're probably going to be able to produce a pretty great result. And I've seen that with some of our powerlifters who are just like, how do you do this? And it's the same thing when you get like a high school kid who jumps up on the rings and is like, is this how you do muscle ups? And can just do it, right? And it's like, and those are sort of pieces that I think get, and obviously that's not a great idea. And I'm not saying go ahead and just wing muscle ups. But with weightlifting, I mean, that's a piece of like, if strength didn't matter, then and it was all technique driven, I mean, we wouldn't have weight classes. And it's just a piece that gets so overlooked. I mean, most general population CrossFitters could be way stronger. And even for games athletes, I mean, there's lots of meat on the bone still left for those athletes out there too, to put on quite a bit more strength inside what they do without having it compromise their running or other movement patterns. And I think that with that, if like you build those squats up and you build those heavy pulls up, and you have the range to support those loads in a front rack, overhead with a jerk grip or with a snatch grip, I mean, the effort that it takes to dial the rest of it in is way less.
Well, think about who's got the world record in Isabel, Eddie Hall.
Yeah.
30, and it's you can produce enough force, just like everyone's saying. I think that's in some cases where the CrossFit competitor gets a little bit too wrapped up into that, because even think about the games this year, like you had one event out of 15, where you had a single high rep or a single high weight max, which it's not always like that, right? Sometimes it's speed, like you got 5 bars set up, so like how quickly can you get through the 5 bars? Obviously top end strength there is going to help, but if you're too perfect in technique in those and you're just not strong enough, like you're going to lose that event. The people with the best technique aren't necessarily winning that event. So if you think about like what the demands of the sport are, like as a CrossFit athlete, you need to have it. But one of the conversations I have with a lot of, especially those like kind of up and coming athletes, is like you're going to be far better at your sport of CrossFit by getting your deadlift stronger, your bench press stronger, your squats stronger, and like that will start to help the Olympic lift. Doesn't mean you're not practicing it. You're still working through it and making sure you're getting reps underneath of it. But for me, again, that's why it's more important for those lifts. Just keep it clean, keep it snappy and fast, and just let the other lifts do their job. Because if you put 50 pounds on your deadlift, unless you're just getting buried in the hole of a front squat, like Shane's saying, then, but if you're picking up speed through that first and second pull, like chances are you're going to be getting the bar higher. So now you don't have to get as low. So lifts are going to start to go up. And I think, one thing you guys are talking about there that I really like is, the way I kind of like to think about it, you've got your, like, kind of your skills transfer stuff where it can be a little bit too nerdy, but that's kind of the GPP, right? Like if you're in a regular CrossFit class, like people are having timing issues, missing, second, that dip position before they jump. So it's pushing the bar forward. Bar path is a big one. So for those, what I kind of like to do between sets, we'll just give them an empty bar and just have them do some basic, some technique stuff, like, oh, you're gonna do a tall snatch, you can do a high hang snatch, just working on those specific positions. But you start getting into your more advanced stuff, it's like, yeah, where are they failing at in the lifts? Now let's start providing specific accessory to build that area up so that you're not failing in that spot anymore. So I think that can be just a way we're thinking about it. Like, where's the level of the athlete? Is it technique based that's really preventing it? And, try to keep it simple there. Don't get too nerdy. And then is it just like, I got a girl right now, it's just like, it's perfect, just exactly what you're saying, Shane. Like everything she lands in the bottom of the front squat looks great. And then all of a sudden it's like, you try to start standing, it's like, nope. It's like, do we need to keep doing more Olympic lifting? No, we're going to start building up your legs and build up that front squat. And that'll bring the lift up.
Yeah, 100%. And the way Chris is talking about it actually makes an athlete injury resilient and less likely to get hurt. Wherever someone's losing speed, there's either a mobility issue or a strength issue that's causing them to lose that speed, right? So when you clear that, you're actually clearing one thing that could have caused a problem, could have caused an injury to that athlete. And, when you look at athletes when they've come to 1-rep maxes and stuff in CrossFit, like look at someone like Sam Dancer, who trains Conjugate, right? Big deadlift, but he can clean and jerk, And that's the thing. It's like you don't look at him and worry about a clean and jerk, but look at his deadlift. Look at his squat. He's strong. And are there Olympic lifters and at the Olympics that have better technique? Sure. I'm not saying that there isn't. But what we're saying is, when you're a CrossFit athlete, if you take that as example, if you should never have the technique that the best Olympic lifters in the world have. If so, you're an Olympic lifter, you're not a CrossFit athlete. There are so many things to work on in CrossFit. If you got to the point where your Olympic lifter are that good, you're probably not winning the games because you're probably very deficient in other things. So if you look at the way we do, one, the best Olympic lifters in the world look at it the way we do. But two, if you're not a phenomenal Olympic lifter and you're trying to be well balanced in a sport that includes Olympic lifting, but many other things, this is a great way to be injury resilient and work on the weaknesses that are going to show up in other movements that it's going to show up at the games as an example as well.
Yeah, being able to identify where that's weak then in the lifts, like so with snatch, clean, jerk, like, where that movement's breaking down. I mean, what I've seen a lot of times with CrossFitters, it's hip strength. And you get those knees that cave in and they've got a front squat that's like 10 pounds over their clean.
So when we're looking at I've taught a lot of seminars for the Conjugate Method seminar that used to be the Westside, seminar. It was the powerlifting for CrossFit. So it's had a few different names throughout the years, but taught a lot of them. And I'm telling you, go into a seminar of 20, 25 people, and you probably have maybe 2 people that have good mobility in their hips. It's not because CrossFit's bad. That's not it at all. It's because that we need variety in our training. And when you go to CrossFit, that becomes the most variety that most people have ever done in training. But the variety of being wide stance and narrow stance doesn't show up in most people's programming. So someone like Jesse and someone like Chris, we're aware of it. So we'll bring in sumo deadlifts, wide stance squats, and we'll bring other lateral stuff in to work on that issue. So majority of the time when you have a mobility issue, it's imbalance in strength somewhere, right? So if you're very quad dominant and your hamstrings are weak, you go wide, your knees want to cave in to try to get into your quads, or they'll shift forward to try to get into their quads. Basically what ends up happening is you put a lot of torque on your hips and you end up creating mobility issues. Your hips end up tightening up because you're actually not moving properly. Okay. So when you strengthen your hamstrings and strengthen the hips, you'll move, correctly. So looking at box squats, looking at like a sumo deadlift, these are things that will work the posterior chain, but those wide stances also work your hips as well. We do so many things narrow. It's not CrossFit. It just means you're not properly laying out your program. CrossFit's supposed to be constantly varied, right? All I'm saying to you is, even though you've done more variation in your CrossFit workouts than you've ever done in any other workout in your life, you still have more variation to go. And this is where you take from the general and you start looking at the specialist side and say, okay, who in here is lacking hip mobility? And what can we do in our WODs, or what can we do in accessories or main movements to start working on that? So even a lot of the workouts that you have in CrossFit, you could have a wide stance squat or put a box squat in or put a sumo deadlift in. in a WOD that you've done before, it's traditionally like a close stance, right? And at least we're getting these things worked, you know, in our classes and stuff. But that's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's
Bringing
super interesting.
people's
I would say that, you know, the seminars, I see this all the time. We talk about it
Mm,
is, you know, people start off with the squats and, you know, you try to move somebody's stance, you know, 2 inches, and
mm,
it's like, nope, like I'm a narrow stance squatter, like it's got
mhm,
to be this way. And it's like, look, if that's your strongest position and that's where you're going to lift your heaviest weights, when you're competing, use that stance.
mhm,
However, CrossFit is variance, and if you can't move your feet wide, like these are natural anatomical ranges of position. Like the wide
mhm,
stance is a natural hip range of motion. If you can't get your hips wide, it's because your hips are lacking mobility and strength, which means you're missing strength, which means the hip's not operating at the highest capacity that it possibly could. So
mhm,
for me, this was a big eye opener, and I think there's more actually. I think why people are starting to get really wrapped up into Conjugate with CrossFit is that, you know, variance is that pillar, and I think that one of the
mhm,
Mhm.
things that's been pretty detrimental to some of the, especially the competitor, is they're getting inundated with the same movement patterns. If you're squatting the same way, it means you're doing wall balls the same way, you're doing thrusters the same way, you're doing
mhm,
back squats the same way, you're doing front squats, you're doing cleans. That is going to create wear and tear. If you
mhm,
know, so if you really want to, you know, if you believe in the principles of CrossFit, which, just as you said, variance is one
mhm,
of those three pillars: variance, functional movements, and intensity. Is, you know, if you're wrapped up in like, no, this is the way I squat every time, then you're missing. There's some meat on the bone. And for me was, you know, I was stuck at, you know, I couldn't get over that 500 for the deadlift for,
mhm,
you know, a year, and then started working. You know, Jesse Ward and Todd, these guys were using the Conjugate system. Started doing sumo deadlift. I just did sumo deadlift for 6 months, put 30 pounds on my conventional deadlift, and I didn't do any conventional deadlifts. And it's just because now my hip is stronger than what it was, and I suck in a wide stance. And that's still like, I predominantly wide stance box squat, sumo deadlift, because those, I'm still like it operating like 70% what my normal stances are in those wide positions, which means I still have a lot of growth to go in those. So like I try to bias my lifts in those positions because I know that's where I'm weak at.
You know, in CrossFit it says, you know, to be ready for anything at any time. If you can't do anything wide stance, you're not ready for anything at any time. You're actually not following what CrossFit's prescribing and wants you to do. Okay, so this isn't like going against CrossFit. It's like, oh, we're doing this, and like, no,
Totally.
you need to be ready for anything, anytime. CrossFit's evolving, right? We're having people who are now spending who've done it for 10 years instead of for a while. It's like, oh, you had someone who's done it for a year and a half, 2 years. Like, oh, you're a veteran at 2.5 years, right?
Right.
Now veterans have been in it a lot longer, right? Like, Chris, how long have you been doing it?
2008. So what, 15
Okay.
years?
And Jesse?
Yeah, about the same, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So the deal we have guys like Jesse and Chris that have spent so much time in it that now we have enough time to see what imbalances could come out. And all that means is that we have, if we have imbalances, is that we have not figured out how to properly program for ourselves or potentially for the classes that we have. And all it is an evolution, which every sport, everything goes through these evolutions. That's why you're going to see every year the CrossFit Games athletes are more capable than they were the previous few years, right? And that's going to keep evolving because of that. I know, Jesse. I'm sorry. You started to look like you were going to say something earlier. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, the hip. Yeah, I agree with Chris. Like it's funny. Like I've run into this with so many people
Mm,
with the stance width on a squat. Like it's such a wall that you hit with, like, they're willing to do anything
mm,
except widen their stance out.
yep.
And the other side is when you do, like, so like we'll distinguish between a box squat and squatting to a box. So we will squat to a box, which would be
Mm,
your regular stance for your free squat, but to a box.
mm,
And then we'll also box squat, which is that very, very wide stance.
mm,
And as you widen most athletes' feet out, I mean, man, it's probably 1 in 5 who are like, oh, okay. And they can widen their feet out and they're fine.
mm,
And the other 4 people, like, their knees start to pull in hard, like they just mechanically can't make it happen. Um, and then rather than be like, oh, whoa, like I feel like that's not an unreasonable ask, I should maybe look at like being able to improve the mobility or ranges to be able to hit that position. And then once that mobility and ranges is improved, be able to build strength there.
mm,
Sort of fortifying positions, because I mean, how many times do you see that freaking like starfish landing on a clean or a
mm.
snatch, where suddenly, you know, the athlete just like jumps their feet crazy wide, and now you're there. And even in competition, you're like, okay, I mean, not optimal, but there you are. And if you're squatting wide, then you're like, ugh, wider than I meant to land, but still fine and going to make the lift be like going to complete the lift successfully. And I just think it's such a massive piece. I mean, I'd say this year at Rogue Invitational last weekend, that was some of the best deadlifting that we've seen out of CrossFitters at the high level. I mean, across the board. I'm not even just for a result, but just the quality of the movement. It was actually quite good, and it's exciting to sort of see. I mean, I have to go back and watch again, but like even the squat workout was just like how common it is to have the knees cave in, and even that felt like it wasn't as prevalent as it's been in the past with having knees, watching like those level CrossFitters like with their knees just like caving in with just weak hips.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, it's one of those things where for a long time a lot of people believed in CrossFit slop. I think that CrossFit slop was something that had to happen at the beginning because we haven't figured out programming yet. But I think as time goes on, I've always said this, as we optimize our programming and we learn more and more on how to optimize our athletes, you're going to see that slop go away. And eventually you're going to see everybody through stuff move laser-like unless they're just ultra fatigued, right? And what's important about this stuff, really is what's great about Olympic lifting is it makes it very hard to hide joint issues. And what I will tell you is bare minimum for your athletes, have full function of the hips and shoulders. If you don't have that, you're going to run into all kinds of issues because somebody goes, well, what about low back? What about low back? If you have full function of your hips, probably not going to have a low back issue. Probably not going to have knee issues, And with shoulders, probably don't have to worry about neck issues. If your shoulders are full functioning, you're creating less, torque through those areas. But it's pretty simple. Make sure you have full internal, external rotation of your hips and shoulders. If you're worried, if you're one of the people that might fall into something we're talking about, we're saying that you have to adjust accessories, or maybe you're not doing enough wide stance movements, check your internal and external rotation on your hips and shoulders. If you have full internal, external rotation on them, you're good. If you don't, guess what? You have something to work on. The great thing about it is if you're scratching your head saying, where can I improve performance at, right? Check to see if you have full function of your joints. If you don't, there you go. Massive place to improve. Your efficiency will go up. You'll be able to maintain better positions. Your efficiency will go up and your wear and tear in your body goes down. And right there shows you that you have something to work on with your accessories or the variations of lifts that you're doing, and you need to make some adjustments. And it's no big deal, but it's really nice. And actually, you could say, hey, you could win the CrossFit Games, or you compete top 10 of the games. And well, yeah, but I mean, I got 6th of the games, and I don't have full use. Well, what place are you going to get when you do have full use? You have to make an improvement somewhere, right? You want to stay in it a long time. The more function you have in your hips and shoulders, the longer you're going to stay in the game.
Yeah, strong through range feels like, range feels like thing one. Like try to even teach those pieces or learn when you're watching someone hold a bar like at nose level for their front rack. You're like, man, you're not having a very fun time, and your motivation is pretty low. 2, I mean, the torque on the elbows and wrists and everything is just so high. Like it is like you're just accumulating that wear and tear unnecessarily. And until you can get that front rack position, and then not only do you have it, so you're like, okay, I can front squat, I can overhead squat. Okay, but how comfortably now can you move there at speed? And that requires just a little more range than required just to perform those patterns, because you got to be smooth through that entire range to those receiving positions. Not only be able to like, well, I can get there. You're like, well, you're pushing hard in the bar and wedging yourself in to that front squat. It needs to be able to get there and have it supported, because I mean, everyone is happy to watch videos on Instagram of weightlifters and be like, see how narrow their stance is. But no one's looking at it and be like, see how comfortably they can rack that bar on their shoulders. And that's the piece that I think, I mean, everyone wants to get down to it and get greasy with the barbell, but the piece of it is, I mean, what's Kelly Starrett's like, don't be the Ferrari driving around with the handbrake on.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, that's just like a big piece. I mean, one of our athletes was at away and traveling and stopped at a gym somewhere. And she was saying that she was like, man, it was crazy. Like we did a basic warm up and just got the barbells out and just dug straight into snatching. And for us, like, I mean, we'll do our dynamic range of motion, And then the next piece on our list is we're going to get, if we're snatching, we're going to get a PVC for a good athlete. If they want to start with a barbell, that's fine. And we're going to do 3 or 4 sets of 5 reps. And between each of those pieces, we're going to add in 1 piece of mobility or prep. And the higher level athletes will choose their own pieces because they have their, like, we would say, what are your podium finishers for mobility? So your top 3 highest value mobility pieces for any given pattern. If we're going to snatch, if we're going to overhead squat, if we're going to front squat or clean, whatever the movement is, what are your 3 critical things? Like, oh, I know I need to mobilize my thoracic spine. I know that I need to prime my ankles. I know that I need to do frog stretch with a band distraction for my hips or a hip capsule stretch prior to doing this. Great. The new athletes we work through as a class or a group, and the coach will select the mobility we do. But the higher level athletes, if they're like, hey, well, you guys are doing that, I'm actually doing this other thing, that's 100% fine with me. But the next thing after a very basic general warm up is range preparation, and then skills preparation, and then load preparation, and then into the work sets themselves. And that's kind of every time. And it's one of those pieces with, having the clinic part of the gym really keeps everyone pretty accountable. Because if we're having problems or we're banging up athletes too much, I'm going to get that feedback within the week from the clinic being like, hey, everyone's shoulders are this, or we're seeing a lot of that. And that has happened in the past. And that's why we're at where we're at now, where we do preload a whole bunch of, like, our preparation is moderate. I mean, in a 1 hour class, like, I wish it took less than 25% of that class to prep and prime for something like a snatch, but it just doesn't. It takes us a while. But at the same time, the question becomes, you're like, how are you using that class time? And I guess if you wanted to weigh it against result, we're doing fairly well. Our athletes are healthy, and the results, and everyone's hitting PRs consistently anytime we test a single on something.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with CrossFit is, obviously the charters, mechanics, consistency, and then intensity for a very large percentage of your GPP demographic. That's going to be a mechanics day, and that's totally fine. You don't have to run through a wall every single day at the CrossFit workout. Like, if that day, like, use it as a mobility day. The Olympic lifts are really good for that. Like, if you do it right, you spend some time mobilizing, opening up ranges of motion, having some light strengthening that range of motion, like, you'll leave the gym feeling better, which now, like, maybe the next day sets you up where, now you've got a thruster and echo bike workout where, let's get after some intensity there. But for a lot of them, just to kind of shift gears, like, it's okay to back off a little bit, open up the ranges of motion, like, have kind of that long-term development plan in mind. Like, what is this going to look like in 3 to 5 years? And not just, I'm going to go as heavy as I can because intensity is the most important. It's like, well, intensity after you move well is most important.
Yeah. And having mobility be a chunk of your, like, improving healthy ranges of motion and having that be a chunk of your programming in a week is not unreasonable. It's higher order. And the piece of, what I've talked about with coaches, they're like, look, our athletes just want to, like, show up and, like, do these WODs, and I can't really sell them on this. And you're like,
you're the coach,
but you're the coach. Yeah, you can. Like, if it's your show and you're the programming and coach, but you also can, because there's lots of gyms out there who are exactly doing this and are full.
Yep. As a coach, you have to instill, you have to have your athletes trust you, right? And you have them trust you because you educate them as you're going, because you find fixes to problems they've had that no one else has been able to find. And at some point, if you have someone resist like that, you're a coach. If you know your craft, you should be able to have a conversation with that individual that leads them to understanding your thought process and why it is a good thing for them. So have those conversations and have confidence in the way you deliver your message. That's a big thing. I think a lot of people they don't have a lot of confidence there when they deliver the information, and they're afraid they're going to lose a client. It's like, look, if you deliver information correctly, 99+% of the time, you'll retain that client. They'll be happy, and you'll be happier. They'll be happier because when they listen, they'll actually get the results they're looking for. If you have a rare percentage that doesn't want to listen, it's okay. There's a door. You don't you don't want people who are not going to listen in your class. It's just going to be a disruption. They're going to start telling other people why they don't think that you're doing, a good job, and that they should do this and they should do that. And it's just a distraction for everybody else. They can go somewhere else and train. They can coach themselves. It's not being mean. It's just, my loyalty is to the people who are loyal to me, and it's to my gym. And if there's one person getting in the way, I remove that person and go on with the rest of them. But that's a very rare case anyway. If you have that happen to you, think about how you worded everything. Are you educating your clients enough? Maybe education in the way you deliver information might have prevented that. Are you confident in the way you choose your words when you deliver the information, or are you like, hey, I kind of feel like if you did this, it would really benefit you, and the person's like, yeah, no, that doesn't work for me. And I don't think so. Saying I kind of, I think, I feel like, no, say, all right, so here's what we're doing. So since you have this issue, you have no hip, your hip mobility is kind of poor, right? So I'm going to check you on a box squat, see how wide you can go, and I'm going to give you a stance that you're going to go with until we clear some of this dysfunction, and then we'll actually start going wider after that. So here's the accessory movements that we're going to utilize to do this. We're going to take you through a series of movements and see where your dysfunction's at, and then we're going to give you your accessories, and then we're going to test and retest as we come back until we clear that dysfunction. I don't give them, they don't have a choice. You're in my gym. You're going to train the way I want you to train. I'm going to fix your problems. If you don't like the way that I do that, then I'm not the right coach for you. But this is not a democracy. This is, I spent my life doing this. All of us here, Jesse, Chris, this is our life's work. This is our passion. This is, life is something that's, it's the most valuable thing we have, right? And a lot of people just cruise through it and I don't think they make the most of it. For people like, Chris and Jesse and I, we're passionate about what we do. We try to put that passion in other people to evolve their lives, to help them be able to accomplish things that they've dreamed of, or to stay healthier for longer periods of time, to get more out of life. So for us, we're passionate about what we do. We're passionate about life, and that's what we want to surround ourselves with. And if someone's not, that's fine. It's not the correct facility for you, and that's okay.
And the results speak for themselves. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you're smart and you're good at what you do as a coach, and people are like, I don't know, but you do, then it's just a matter of time. Like, it's just a matter of time for like, oh man, I can't believe it. Like we had one of our guys come in and said he transitioned up here, or moved up here from the city. And he was like, oh man, I wasn't sure if I was going to come in today. It was Grace. He has, been in CrossFit for a long time, super strong, super solid, used to train a ton more hours, now has, it's got the kids on the go, business, work, everything else. He's like, I just don't want to come in and come up short on this. I'm like, well, I mean, let's have a good plan and let's see where the trainings put you. And ends up with an all-time PR on Grace. And he's like, I never would have guessed. And it just, I mean, because you don't have to blow your brains out every day if you're training smart. I mean, the objective is results. So the objective is results. I mean, you need to maintain a couple things. One, you got to keep athletes healthy, which there's a bill to be paid for that, right? Like it's going to be like on those mobility prep pieces, on sort of like what you're finishing with, how you're assembling a week for, volumes and intensities. And like, if you can't keep them healthy, people are not going to stick around, because a handful of injuries is usually someone's washed out and done. And then two, I mean, if the goal is results and you can display that through what you're up to, I mean, the buy-in, and they don't have to work as hard as they used to. Like they can achieve better results with, I mean, isn't that why people started doing CrossFit in the first place? Is because they were going to the gym, putting in a ton of hours and getting zero results. And then they started doing CrossFit and they're like, holy frick, I can go 3 to 5 times a week for 1 hour. And I've learned a ton more patterns. I'm infinitely more capable of this broad spectrum of components of fitness. Like, I mean, that's the whole thing, but you just got to be careful that then, because of that, you don't readjust to that same level of just being like, these are the only things that I do. This is how I achieve my results. The only way to do this is to like crush it, blow your brains out every day. I mean, if you're coming in If you're coming in sore, that's fine. But if you're coming in beat up and your nervous system is taxed and your body is sore and you felt like this for weeks, I mean, are you getting the results you want? Maybe, but maybe no.
Jesse hit the nail on the head. Really, it is funny. People get frustrated. They spend 10 years in a global gym and they got results for 6 to 9 months and nothing else after that. Then they go to CrossFit and they're like, a year later, like, I'm still getting results. Like, this is mind blowing to me. And then, results always slow down. I mean, that it does. It's harder and harder the more capable you are to get to go farther, right? But we know that you have to introduce 15% or more new exercises a year to athletes to learn new movement at the fastest rate possible. So CrossFit introduced a ton of new movements. Once you've gotten good at all those movements that your CrossFit coach gives you, you still need 15% or no more new movements to learn at the fastest rate possible. So a lot of times you're like, oh, I don't want to do like sumo, or I don't do wide stance squat. Like, that's not in what we do. It's everything's in what we do. What if the CrossFit Games said, okay, we're doing a 50-mile ruck? They can do anything they want to do. This point is to be ready for anything at any time. Something could be ultra endurance. Can you maintain position with a pack on your back for 50 miles? It can be a 1 rep max of a variation. What if they say 1 rep max sumo deadlift? You're going to say, well, we don't go wide. Being ready for anything at any time means you go wide. It also means
sandbag.
constant variation. Yep. Yeah. If you want to pick up a heavy stone or a really big heavy sandbag, you have no choice but to go wide stance. Hate to tell you, but when it comes to stones and it comes to like heavy, heavy bag,
any object,
any object, the heavier the stone, the wider the stance. Sorry, but that's just what's available to you. So CrossFit doesn't say, hey, do every movement that we've programmed in like the girls' WODs. Those are it. No, they say be ready for anything, anytime. And for us to do that, we have to be well balanced and we have to bring in that variety. So that mindset, that frustration that you had when you were at the global gym for 10 years before you went to a CrossFit gym, don't wait 10, 15 more years to get frustrated again. Keep it going. What you learned from CrossFit, listen, pay attention, look at the principles of CrossFit, keep them going. Don't let them run out. If you feel like you're getting bored because you're like, I really do. I honestly believe this. I think, a lot of CrossFit gyms, you go to some gyms, they average retentions a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is. If you look at, I guarantee you this, my CrossFit gym, I held retention for a long time. I guarantee Jesse holds for a long time. I guarantee Chris holds for a long time. Why? Because we have a ton of variety compared to a lot of people. And I really feel like people get like, say that their coaches can bring enough variety to challenge them for a year. They're going to stay for a year and a half. Once they've kind of gone through everything, then they know exactly what to expect from all the WODs. They don't have any new WODs coming their way, and they know. And then now the pressure starts to come on because it's like, well, I know exactly what I should be doing. And it's the thing about CrossFit that brings to you right off the bat, variation in intensity. Most people have never went as intense as they did once the buzzer goes off and it's a competition. So now the intensity is there and the variation's there. But once there's no more variation, all you get to concentrate on is the intensity. And most people are not wired for that intensity. The only people are the people who are CrossFitters for life or competitive CrossFitters. But your average person is not wired to go that intense that long. They only got bought into it because they didn't know what they were signing up for at the beginning. And they hear a workout like, oh, I can do pull-ups, 21, 15, 9, thrusters, pull-ups. That's all I have to do for the day. Like, oh, this is easy. And they're actually probably kind of excited because they're like, oh, cool, I'll get my workout in, but, it's not going to be too harsh on me. And then they go through Fran and realize, wow, this was nothing like I expected. And I went 10 times harder than I ever wanted to. But I paid for that membership. They're probably like, okay, after this month, I'm gone, And then after that month, they're like, whoa, like in a month, I've made more change in this month than I have in the last few years. Okay, I'm going to stay a little longer. But the minute it gets boring to them, okay, they're gone. You can use this conjugate sequence system. You can use a lot of specialty stuff from, endurance athletes and all kinds of areas to really start honing those athletes in and to bring more variation in. It's still CrossFit. We're just coming up with variations you haven't seen before because we finally have spent enough time in the gym to reach a level that we can introduce these things to you in. It's not that it's not CrossFit. We're like, okay, now you're done with CrossFit. Now we go to the next thing. That's not it. It's still CrossFit. We're just getting you farther down the rabbit hole. So now we have to introduce some new things to you. So what is CrossFit? It's a general preparedness to be ready for anything at any time. Doesn't mean you're going to be, win a gold medal in the Olympics. Doesn't mean you're going to win the mile at the Olympics. Doesn't mean you're going to be a world record, a world champion in gymnastics. What it does mean, though, is if your friends ask you to play a basketball game, you can. If they're like, hey, we want to go run a 10K with us this weekend, you can. Hey, you want to go for a hike this weekend? Let's do, 2 15-mile days back to back, you can. If you have a friend who bodybuilds, like, hey, join me for a workout, you can. You can do anything you want to do. But at some point, we have to make sure we're perfectly well balanced, and we have to make sure we're learning new skills and new work on every different type of strength instead of just general strength. Now let's start honing on some other strengths that we might not possess. How do we get a faster time in certain workouts? Well, maybe our workouts are 10 minutes or less. Maybe we're not good at those. Maybe you don't move fast enough. Okay, so that speed work that we're doing can get you to move faster. So now you're more competitive in those WODs. Fran isn't Fran if it takes you 15 minutes. Because it's not burning your lungs down. It's not giving you that same feeling. So if we are doing workouts prescribed by CrossFit, but the way we go through them isn't the way CrossFit intended those workouts to be, we have to gain those types of strengths to be able to do the workout in the manner in which that workout was meant to be done. And now we get full use and full as much as we can out of those workouts. Okay. So I look at this a little bit different than I think some people do, but to me, and I think, probably to Jesse and Chris, like if I'm doing speed work with you to get you better at something for a CrossFit WOD, I'm still doing CrossFit with you.
Like what would be things that you would see as common faults with weightlifters or like a CrossFitter who's doing weightlifting
to me
that you would give for a prescription?
Yeah. For me, when I look at it, we need to see them maintain their spinal position, right? So you see people who don't have mobility and they go to this deep squat position, but their butt rolls underneath or their knees cave in. So they look like, a newborn deer when they hit the bottom of a squat, I look at a lot of people are not strong enough in their triceps, and triceps are weird. Like I literally had a girl trying to snatch and she kept missing it. And she had been competing in Olympic lifting for a long time. And all I said is, when that bar comes over, start spreading the bar and use their triceps and lock your triceps out fast. Like spread the bar, lock your triceps. Wham, all of a sudden it was clean. Most people probably don't think about using triceps or spreading that bar when they're snatching, but for some people, that's a good thing to do. It's really hard to learn how to do it while snatching. It's easier to learn it to do while you're benching. Once you understand that principle in benching, it's easier to do a more dynamic and a faster rate of speed. But I think a lot of times they don't put enough emphasis on like triceps as an example, or hamstrings as an example, or hips. But knees caving is a huge one. Chest dropping. Yeah. You see people catch a clean and the chest drops. What do you do for your spinal erectors? What do you do for your midline? Do you ever do 1 rep maxes, 3, 5 rep maxes on your abs? Do you work your obliques enough to fire your hips fast enough? Do you work your spinal erectors enough to maintain position? Because you're getting bent over at 225, but yet there's people out there like, we've had, guys in my gym do 870-pound good mornings. Do you think they're getting bent over 225 in a front rack? I don't think so. You go to jerk a weight and you can't complete, 315. Well, you think a 600-pound close grip bencher is going to be worried about 315 jerk overhead? No, they'll fucking strict press it for you, Like, obviously there's weight classes and everything involved, but I just don't think people break it down like that. I think that every time they look at Olympic lifting, if you miss something, what technique do we need to work on? You can't technique everything away.
Wall Street lifter, look at him. That guy, he shoulder presses and push presses the living hell out of the bar, and dude can snatch 315. It's not perfect technique by any means, but he's got such strong bases that doesn't really matter.
I think technique is everyone knows technique is important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, goes without saying, right?
I think people could spend a lot more time looking at mobility and their comfort through those ranges of motion. And then, like we talked about with any other conjugate piece, is breaking down that pattern of what we're seeing in that lift. Because there's a million things.
Mm-hmm.
Like what you're seeing in that lift, where is the athlete weak? And then that's what we fortify. Like that's where we pick up on the accessory piece, the secondary piece, right? Yeah, because Shane's right. I mean, you get athletes who are failing with like thoracic spine on receiving that front squat or receiving the clean, trying to stand it up, or they go to stand it up, and as they start to push, they start to cave. And if it's not mobility driven for being unable to support that rack, or it's not technique driven because they're not, they're reaching for the bar as they receive, or piece like that, then the next piece is, let's start adding in good mornings. Zercher good mornings are great for like being a little more thoracic spine than they are low back. Zercher squat. These are easy things you just need a regular barbell for, and just willingness to be a little bit sad for a little bit of time.
This glute ham raises. There's a reason why Olympic lifters invented the glute ham raise. So what cracks me up in the United States is go to Olympic lifting only gyms that only do Olympic lifting, and tell me what the percentage of finding a GHD in is. What, 1%? 0.5%? How do you take the two of the most successful countries in the world, one of them who invented the conjugate system developed the glute ham raise first, the other one also utilizes a glute ham raise, and how do you not even possess, have one in your possession at a gym when you're doing Olympic lifting? What I'm saying is, like, it's hamstring work, and we know, like, you guys know, the first time you get someone to do a glute ham raise correctly, you find some very strong individuals who get shocked very quickly. I always tell you, I had a seminar. I had 3 guys that weighed under 200 pounds. All of them had an over 600-pound deadlift. Not one of them could do 1 rep the way I wanted them to. And you're like, that's 600-pound is not a shabby deadlift for an under 200-pound individual. That's a strong individual. They couldn't do 1. And so they're sitting there looking like, why? I deadlift over 600 pounds. I don't get that. It's like, well, you want to deadlift 700? You want to deadlift 8? Because 700, that's your 700-pound deadlift right there. Start crushing those. That will at least get it going. Might get you to 700, might not, but it's going to get you halfway there at least. And from there, you can learn something. And the next thing you learn will get you the rest of the way.
And that is a piece, is like observe, think about it, and learn. Apply what you're seeing. So if you're seeing, generally athletes breaking down for mobility, all of the same thing happens, because you'll have individual pieces, but you also have a herd health piece where you're just sort of seeing, in general, we're weak here, or in general, we need this. Like right now for my gym, in general, we need to work a little more getting that, like how we're getting that bar off the floor. Like that's what we need to work on a little more as a group. For strength in general, things are pretty good right now. We're not seeing like systemic pieces, but like just being able to look past the lifts themselves and pick pieces that are going to positively contribute.
We always go into like oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jesse.
I think one of those is that, box squat, wide stance positions for sure is building more powerful hips. However it takes to get there will produce a better result on snatch and clean and jerk.
If you look at, like, say, a clean and jerk, and let's say the jerk is the weakest point of your lift, right? Now, obviously, there's a point where you drop, and that can be part of your timing and stuff. But to give you an example, Louis Simmons always used to say this. I say it. I know everybody on this panel agrees. To always be a student in your sport. And so when people are like, "Oh, bench isn't important for an Olympic lifter," I always say, "Well, why did the Russian Dynamo Club have a minimum 465 close grip bench for a 242-pound lifter? How many Olympic lifters in the United States do you know who weigh 242 or more and close grip 465 or more?" But that was a requirement in that weight class for the Russian Dynamo Club, one of the most successful clubs in history, right? So, there's these components that you will read about and you'll see. And, when you look at a clean, and like a lot of times people are like, oh, you only need to clean or front squat 5% more than you clean and jerk, or 10% more, right? But then if you look at the top 10 in history, Solomon and all those, they're always right around 20% or a little more than 20%. So I don't care when someone says 5-10%. I'm going to study history. And you show me what the top 10, 20 in history do. Yeah, that's where the percentages I'm going to follow, right? And the funny thing is their percentages on the front squat are substantially higher than what they talk about in books and what you should do as far as what a front squat compared to your clean and jerk, right? So, pay attention to not only what books say, but pay attention to what the actual athletes who are the most successful in the world, what did they actually do? And I'm not picking on the United States and Olympic lifting. I'm just trying to point out some of the differences and where we see some of the pitfalls here in the United States, where we've already found you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's some people out there who already figured out how to get past it. Okay. What you need to do is reduplicate before you innovate. Figure out how to fix your problems as fast as the Chinese do and the Russians do. Once you learn how to do that, then you can be innovative. We always say reduplicate before you innovate. You can't be innovative if you can't produce results at the same level of other coaches doing what they do. If I could get to the point where I could take Olympic lifters and produce as quick as Mao does, now I can be innovative. Because if I have an idea, I'm probably correct, or I'm probably in the right on the right lane. Okay, but if I can't do what they do, I'm just a shot in the dark. So becoming a student in your sport, see what other coaches have done to fix issues, see what other athletes have done to have a high result or really good in areas that you're weak at. Okay. But sometimes you just break it down simply. If you keep missing at the jerk, you know what? Yes, you might not be, dropping underneath that bar as fast as you can, but you can work on that technique, get your triceps stronger. If you clean the weight and you can't stand up with it, well, you got to be able to front squat the weight, after you clean it before you can jerk it, right? So get your front squat up. What's that look like? Do you need stronger legs? Maybe. If your chest drops and you can't maintain position, do you know how to brace with your midline properly? If you do, then do you have a strong enough brace? Is your midline strong enough? Are your spinal erectors strong enough, right? Your abs strong enough? If, you clean a weight and it's the second pull is slow, what do you do with your hips? There's a lot of Olympic lifters I've met that thought they had strong hips, and when I tested them, they did not have strong hips. They just had really good technique, and they had enough speed to get past that. But if they actually had the hip strength to match their technique and speed, then they're cleaning a whole different weight. That's a whole different level now. Okay. So don't just think because if you watch a video that you look fast through the hips, that your hips are fast. Also test them. A good way to test them, looking at that, is like wide stance movements, heavy band tension, or even a close stance, deadlift. If you put band tension on a conventional deadlift, see how much you slow down through the middle. It's take other people in your weight class. If say Jesse and Chris and I were all in the same weight class, well, after we get on the cleans, if I think one of us has weak hips, okay, we can all go over to hip bridges. Well, if we all have the same clean, our hip bridges should be within 5-10 pounds of each other. We should be within a rep of each other, right? But if one of us is 50 pounds, weaker, 100 pounds weaker than the rest of us, and we're all within 5-10 pounds of each other on a clean and jerk, oh, well, we know what the problem is, right? And now I'm getting exhausted about every angle I can think of to take care of those hips, right? And then if you sit there and didn't even look at a clean and jerk, but you did your squats and you did all your accessory movements, if I was the 150 pounds down, the minute I can match Jesse and Chris on a hip bridge and all their hip accessories, I guarantee when I go back, I hit a PR on my clean. That simple.
Yeah, and looking at things without needing to get a bunch of specialty bars, of also just being able to, front squat, box squat, and choosing different stance for that deficit. Coming off of so if you warm up your group and you work through cleans and you do, cleans, we actually do 12 doubles on the 75 seconds. So if you did 12 doubles on your clean 75 seconds, and the next thing you're going to do is, you could go 5 sets of 4 reps, increasing in weight, and go deficit, 2-inch deficit front squat, box squat. You're off to a good start for that hour.
Yep. And, I don't like to hear a lot of people say, oh, I'll do the counter system. I don't have enough equipment for it. One, the Russians did a very minimal equipment. The Chinese are still doing it with very minimal equipment.
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing is, and when Westside started, it was minimal equipment. A lot of things, like Louis Simmons developed a lot of things at Westside. A lot of the lifters ran into issues and, try to figure out how to go beyond barriers, and that developed things. We saw other coaches develop new products, and we took a look at them. We tried all kinds of stuff. Some stuff didn't work well and we got rid of it. And some things did work great. Right. And so, we took a look at who else out there is good, right? So like Dr. Hatfield, Dr. Squat, the guy who gets credit for the first 1,000-pound squat, develops a safety squat bar. Well, just because we didn't develop it doesn't mean we're going to avoid it. Oh, we got it right away. And you know what? Safety squat bar is one of our favorite bars, right? Just because we didn't invent it doesn't mean we won't use it. We're not like that, man. We're looking at everybody who's having success. What are they doing? Is there a piece of equipment they have? Is there a movement pattern there? What are they doing differently? We're paying attention to everything at all times. But I will say you can do this with minimal equipment with phenomenal success. Okay. Been plenty of world records done that way. Pay attention to the Chinese and the Russians and West Side when it was, younger in the younger days. That being said, I look at it just like I look at CrossFit. I love that CrossFit can be done out of your garage and you can do a ton of stuff with very minimal equipment. If you want to build the best in the world, now look at like a Formula One team. We're not taking a go-kart to the track and racing around the track and have, can be our own pit crew and we can build our own stuff. And, we need minimal equipment. Now we're a Formula One team, and now we want the highest tech equipment, the most variety and options available to us. But, it takes a long time to get there. And as coaches, I'd be like, well, I can't afford that. Don't worry about it. As you level up, you'll be able to afford more and more equipment and more variation. You'll actually have a bigger and broader understanding of maybe what the next piece you want to buy is. So you can make smarter and smarter choices on that. We all started off minimally. We all started with next to nothing. Okay. So don't worry about that. What you can do is look at the way you do your program and you can start to decide what you need next for the groups of people that are in front of you and what they're lacking as a whole and work your way backwards from there.
Yeah. I think overall, those are the things that we probably have to contribute a value without some specific questions.
100%.
Like there's obviously there's so many ways to go about it, so many pieces and little nuances, but in general, I mean, keep it simple.
Come back to this subject once we get questions too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing too, is definitely want to wrap with like, if you feel like you've got questions about any of this content or content from any other podcasts, definitely feel free to reach out directly to Chris, Shane, or myself, and we'll try to address it like on the next episode or as soon as we can get there. But I think I would say, like, in general with weightlifting, for how we apply it, we take all the principles we've talked about in all the other podcasts, and all we do is just add in those movement patterns into the system. We're still focusing on secondary pieces that have a positive effect towards our goal or the outcome we're trying to achieve. And then we have accessory work that feeds that as well. And we finish on midline. It's just adding into the mix snatch, clean and jerk, and those variations. Like I said, I hit them for 3-week waves as dynamic efforts, and we'll also hit them as maxes. We can max clean and use that as a substitute on a day where it would be a lower. We can max snatch or overhead squat for us on days where it would otherwise be a max upper. Shane said earlier that bench press and the application of jerk, for sure I can speak to that, saying we've had a ton of success with pushing jerks up in weight by improving an athlete's bench press. And myself included, actually, I moved my jerk 25 pounds over a 3-month period where I couldn't work overhead and just put that time and effort into bench press, coming back to that lift, and was able to hit a PR back in the days where I was still doing a little more of that.
You said it correctly. It's just one of those things that sometimes people are like, well, I worked bench press and it didn't work out with my clean and jerk. Was your technique perfect? Were you good at technique? Are you aware of what good technique is? Because I'll tell you right now, 99+% of people do not know what good technique on bench is. So one, do that properly. The other component to it is, are you doing the mobility work to maintain your shoulder mobility? So just because it didn't work for you doesn't mean that it's not something you need. You might have to relook at it, revisit it, and it just might mean that you didn't execute it in a manner that would have been conducive to causing that to go up. Because one thing I do want you to look at throwers, shot putters, discus throwers. Shot putters are phenomenal benchers. They're also really good at the Olympic lifts. Once you take a step down from Olympic lifters, shot putters are, they can move some serious weight. And they're the same thing for bench press. They move serious weight on bench press. They have great jerks overhead. If you look at the amount of weight they move overhead, they're phenomenal at it. Okay. But they're also phenomenal benchers too.
Yeah. And with that, sometimes similar to mobility, it's okay if something doesn't work for you. It just might not be the right fit. Like every piece doesn't have the same effect on every athlete. Some people are like, man, that was game changer and made a huge difference. Another athlete would be like, that mobility piece or that strength piece didn't really positively affect my my result. And then because of that, you're like, okay, great, no problem. Then we know that currently, because it may change in the future, but currently that's not the right piece. based off of that, what might be the next best choice. And these are how we learn and find these things.
Okay.
I would say that to wrap this up, like I said, reach out to any of the three of us if you have any questions or pieces you'd like to hear us speak about, or you feel like we could help you on anything.
Cool.
If you enjoyed this podcast or any of the other ones, it would help us a lot if you shared the good word. And if you posted or just sent to a friend, or any other feedback you've got for us. All those things are helpful. Like I said, we're doing our best to try to get these out as often as we can. Obviously, we've come off a bit of a gap, but hopefully over the next bunch of months, you get to hear a little more from us. And if you've got topics you'd like to hear us cover, let us know. Otherwise, we'll wrap it there.
Conjugate Nation Podcast.